Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. I can assure you that all three of us that are on this today are in very different time zones, and we totally appreciate it wherever you're joining us from. Thank you. We appreciate our live audience, and we also appreciate those who will watch it later in the archives. Welcome to another special edition of Book Passages Conversations with Authors. I'm your host, Paula Farmer, and let me continue to express appreciation on behalf of Book Passage staff all over for not only coming to this particular event, but also for supporting our events like this online, as well as now we're back in the store doing events. Definitely go to our website to find out if something is live online or if it's actually in our store in San Francisco or in Corte Madera. We want you to show up and not at the wrong location. We've got a lot coming up as far as the events for the month of February, including we have special events lined up in honor of Black History Month. I will be moderating and hosting our annual Race in America panel event. This year, it's more of an online mini-series. And we'll kick off this time next week. So please look for that and join us for that. Today's featured book, Western Lane, is an enthralling debut novel about grief, sisterhood, and young athletes' struggle to transcend herself. It is a send-up to innocence, to the closeness of sisterhood, and to the strange ways we find to kind of connect with each other. I will also say that it's beautifully written and it's truly an impressive debut. Author Chetna Maroo lives in London, so thanks to her for staying up late to do this. Her stories have been published in the Paris Review, the Stinging Fly, and the Dublin Review, and she was the recipient of the 2022 Plimpton Prize for Fiction. Joining Chetna and steering the conversation is seasoned author Yiyun Li, who we featured just a few months ago for her latest release, The Book of Goose, which is behind me. She is the author of several other works of fiction and is the recipient of many, many awards, including the PEN Hemingway Award, PEN Gene Stein Book Award, a MacArthur Fellowship, and that's just to name a few. Yiyun teaches at Princeton, so she's joining us from the East Coast in New Jersey. Thank you both for adjusting your schedules and doing this. We are so looking forward to it. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to your capable hands.
Thank you so much, Paula. Hello, everyone. And thank you, Chetna, for really staying up late to celebrate the launch of your book. And congratulations on the great review just appeared, I think, a few hours ago on the New York Times book reviews website. And I wonder, do you want to start reading just a little bit for the audience so we can set up the stage for the audience?
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to say thank you, Ian, and to Paula and Book Passage, and also Brookline Booksmith and Literati Books, who are also streaming. And thank you to everyone who is joining. I am really happy and excited to launch my book with you. So yeah, I'm going to start with reading from the opening of Western Lane, just a couple of pages. I don't know if you have ever stood in the middle of a squash court on the tee and listened to what's going on next door. What I'm thinking of is the sound from the next court of a ball hit clean and hard. It's the quick, low pistol shot of a sound with a close echo. The echo, which is the ball striking the wall of the court, is louder than the shot itself. This is what I hear when I remember the year after our mother died and our father had us practicing at Western Lane 2, 3, 4 hours a day. It must have been an evening session after school, the first time I noticed it. My legs were so tired, I didn't know if I could keep going, and I was just standing on the tee with my racket head down, looking at the side wall that was smudged with the washed out marks from all the balls that had skimmed its surface. I was supposed to serve, and my father would return with a drive, and I would volley, and my father would drive, and I would volley, aiming always for the red service line on the front wall. My father was standing far back, waiting. I knew from his silence that he wasn't going to move first, and all I could do was serve and volley or disappoint him. The smudges on the wall blurred one into the other, and I thought that surely I would fall. That was when it started up. A steady, melancholy rhythm from the other court, the shot and its echo over and over again, like some sort of deliverance. I could tell it was one person conducting a drill, and I knew who it was. I stood there listening, and the sound poured into me, into my nerves and bones, and it was with a feeling of having been rescued that I raised my racket and served.
What a beautiful opening.
Thank you. I was going to read another little section that sort of follows, and this is much shorter. There were 3 of us, all girls. When Ma died, I was 11, Kush was 13, Mona 15. We've been playing squash and badminton twice a week ever since we were old enough to hold a racket. But it was nothing like the regime that came after. Mona said that all of it, the sprints and the ghosting and the 3-hour drills, started when our Aunt Ranjan told Pa that what we girls needed was exercise and discipline, and Pa sat quiet and let her tell him what to do. But I think Pa told us himself what moved him. He sat beside us one morning on the bench outside the squash court and said, I want you to become interested in something you can do your whole life. Thank you.
What a striking line. I marked that line. I want you to have something to do for the rest of your life. And I feel that there's such a, I will go back to the squash court, but that line when the father says that, there's something about the conflict between permanency and impermanency in the book that I found quite striking and moving. And can you talk a little bit about that? Because now there's a father with 3 teenage girls or adolescent girls, and he set his heart to give them something for the rest of their life, as though anyone can have that certainty that I'm giving you something for the rest of your life. Well, the mother just died. Nothing is permanent. So can you talk a little bit about that? The pull of those permanency and impermanency in these girls' lives.
Yeah, I guess the mother is gone, and when she was alive, the girls struggled to communicate with her in some ways because so she's the family are Gujarati, and the girls would speak to her in Gujarati and not in English, whereas with everybody, with their aunts and uncles, they would speak in English because their mother's English wasn't good enough and their Gujarati wasn't great. And so they would find themselves kind of making themselves physical in her presence, really watching her and listening to her. So they've always sort of struggled with this language. And then I guess one of the things that the father, Pa, as he's sort of named in the novel, is giving the girls is a kind of another physical language, which is this language of sport in the squash court. And something perhaps a bit more prosaic is that he has played squash when he was younger, and it is something that has stayed with him, and sport and the ability to just have something where you're moving in a rhythm and doing drills and you can just practice by yourself or with somebody else, is kind of another thing that he is giving to them. Yeah, I guess that's what he's giving to them. I'm not sure I've answered your question about the permanence and impermanence. But
no, it's fascinating because when you say, the father, has given them a physical language, and what we just heard you read at the beginning, it's almost as though the squash court is talking back, whether in echo or in a variation of that language. And I find that the novel is very physical, and partly it is centered around this squash, extensive training, intensive training. But part of it is, I think time really slows down on that court for the narrator, and possibly for, any sports player. I think the time just slows down. And then we get to eavesdrop on the narrator, talking not to her sisters or her father, but to the court, to the sport. Can you talk a little bit about, squash in the middle of that, the part of the, almost as a character, right?
Yeah.
There's the family, but the squash is a character. It's a great character. And at times, this character is talking back to the narrator. And at times, the character is not talking back. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between the narrator and the squash, the great character of squash?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with kind of where the book started from for me. So it started with the feeling of being inside a squash court, with a voice saying there were three of us, and I knew it was three sisters. I knew it was three sisters inside the squash court. I knew it was Gopi and the narrator telling the story. I knew there was a father on the balcony above them instructing them, and I knew they all felt the presence of an absent mother. So that was right from the beginning. I kind of had that emotional and spatial world of the story, and the squash is there, partly because I know the game, but partly because that's just where it started. But then the more I kind of wrote into the book and just followed it, the more the squash court kind of took on like this kind of took on relevance in the book. And one of the things is just such a strange, kind of simple, unfamiliar place, this like white box. And I think that's one of the reasons, like, because it's so unfamiliar, that time feels suspended in there. And so it is this place where Gopi and her father, who are kind of grieving the lost mother and then frightened about the future, can kind of go and live and kind of almost just forget the outside world. And I think that is what allows Gopi to be perhaps very receptive inside the squash court, and therefore to kind of have that conversation, or be very kind of have her senses very heightened in there.
Yes, I do think, that's one of the powers of death, is to make, extraordinary things ordinary and ordinary things extraordinary. I think this, what you said, the squash is such an unnatural setting. It's just a box with a glass side, right? But it's not a natural setting for life, but it becomes the most natural setting for their grieving, and they, their life sort of unfolds in that box. I find the spatial setting quite fascinating and well done. But they're not just in the box. I want to just show the book cover. It's a beautifully designed cover with all these balls. When I was reading the book, I feel the balls bouncing here. All those ideas bouncing in my head. Western Lane. Can you place Western Lane on the map for the readers, for those readers who haven't got a chance to read the novel?
Place the novel on the map.
Oh no, the title, Western Lane, because they go to they go to Western Lane to practice, and then the other people come to the practice place. So can you just place the setting for the readers?
Yeah. So Western Lane is the squash court, or the sports centre, sorry, where the father takes his girls to play squash. It's a rundown place, and the paint on the walls is peeling. The 2 squash courts are often empty, and the family go. So the 3 girls go and they train together at Western Lane. The father is quite often upstairs on the balcony or outside the squash court watching them, or instructing them, and there is a swimming pool, and they hear the sounds of the swimming pool when they're in the squash court. There is a corridor outside. A lot happens in the corridor outside the squash court. So yeah, there's a lot going on in kind of the squash court itself, but also the balconies and the corridors and those kind of in-between places that don't have any real function.
Right. It's such a lonely place, right? You know, we know it's a community center. We know it's supposed to be for people to gather to play, and yet it has this empty feeling. You know, as you said, it's a rundown place. And then, of course, you know, there's a bar, right? People can drink, but it's an empty bar almost. But I think I find it so fascinating because you're subtle with those things. You said, you know, on the weekends, there are factory workers coming. You realize that also plays the Western Lane on the map for us, although there are factory workers, but it feels an isolated place. Is it an isolated place, or is it a place where, you know, only lost people go find themselves?
Oh, I like that. I'm going to go with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's isolated, but the family now, you know, now we have the squash court in the middle, in the center of the novel. And then we have Western Lane. We realize there are other people, but then we move further away. Then there are families. Can you talk a little bit about family relationship? You know, there are the uncle and aunts in Edinburgh, and there are also relatives, you know, or distant relatives in Mombasa, and friends and distant relatives in Mombasa and in India. And we realize, you know, from that little core of the squash court, actually the world expands for the novel. And can you just give the readers a sense of the larger world? You know, these are immigrants, but they're also quite intercontinental in a way, right? Their communications and lives.
Yeah, so the family have roots in India, and a lot of family will have moved to Kenya. So there are family, or to East Africa. So there's family in Mombasa in Kenya and in Tanzania. And then so they're obviously this branch of the family have moved to a town near London, and then there is the aunt and the uncle in Edinburgh, but and then they see each other a lot, or at least, you know, once or twice a year, even though they are quite far apart. You know, there's always plans for people from Tanzania to be visiting.
Right.
And there is the community. So there is the Gujarati community beyond the family that are also kind of very present, and Pa and the mother would go visiting family, you know, every weekend, and Pa does continue that for a time, or visiting not just family but people in the community.
Yeah, and it's a crowded life, and yet there's the center of the novel. There's a sort of an emptiness that I thought it's really well done. It's the loss of a mother. It's almost as though, you know, it's a crowded life, it's a loud life, but somehow these girls are put in like a glass dome, sort of isolated or separated from the rest of the world. And can we talk about the sisters? Because at the center of the novel, there are 3 sisters. By the way, they really remind me. I know you may not have any intention, but, you know, it reminds me a little bit of King Lear. You know, the Lear does not.
Yeah.
the leader's wife died, right? And the whole leader is about something breaking up. It's about family breaking up. And now you almost have like sort of a parallel setting, but it's not a leader story. So I want to hear you talk about the three sisters, because I keep thinking, oh, there's Cordelia.
Yeah, that is okay. I'm gonna go and read that or go and watch it. So Gopi is the youngest, so she is 11, and initially she's in the shadows. She's very watchful. She's shy to the extent that she blushes when her aunt calls her name or singles her out. She's very close to her sisters, particularly the middle sister, Kush. And she kind of mirrors her sister. So if Kush goes out onto the balcony in their aunt's house, then Gopi follows. If she sits a certain way, then Gopi will sit that way, or she lies a certain way, Gopi will lie that way. And I think there is this very deep need in Gopi for connection and love, and an openness to things maybe that she senses or imagines like beyond her experience. And I think Kush, who is the middle sister, is like that too, to an extent. But Kush is kind of like the storyteller of the family. So if something happens, she's the one that kind of comes back and says, this is what happened. And then to everyone else now, that's the story of what happened. And yes, I think she thinks and feels very deeply but in her grief, she goes quiet. So she goes out onto the upstairs landing of the house at night and tries to make contact with her mother.
Right.
Mona, the eldest, is very concerned with appearances and duty, and she wants the family to conform to what is expected of them in the community. She's also practical and concerned with like the physical well-being of the family, and she kind of she locks horns with the father about how he spends his time, about money, and she's the one that takes charge of the household. But the three sisters are very close, like they know each other intimately, they love each other. We see them crowded together in a bathroom, like they're watching their mother closely when she was alive. They're brushing their teeth together, they're holding each other's hair back over the sink when they're brushing their teeth. And they can seem like a collective of three, but they each have their own lives and their own concerns, and they each exist in their own world. And this can put them at odds. But underneath that, there is the familiarity and the love.
Yeah. It's quite astonishing to feel that, as you said, almost the love among the three sisters, it's quite physical too. In a way, it's very textured. The little touches, little echoes, and they watch each other. And I thought, well, this is, I think this is an author who watches her characters when they're not watching themselves, which is a very good way to write, young people, I think. I think young people are self-conscious, but young people also don't watch themselves all the time, but they watch others. And I almost feel that in the novel, Gopi is especially good because she's the youngest, right? It's like that stun doll quote that a character carries. I always use that quote. The character carries a mirror on his shoulder, walking down Main Street, and if he turns this way, he reflects that. If he turns that way, he reflects the street. And I thought Gopi is one of those narrators. She never really turns the mirror towards herself and say, "Look, this is me. I have hair this way." She's always, sort of shifting the mirror between the sisters. And is that something you have been thinking about when you write, a first-person narrator?
I think that I was always nervous about writing a first person piece of fiction that is long, because I think it's quite hard to sustain that sometimes without it feeling kind of claustrophobic, and for me as the writer as well as for the reader. I don't know how much I've been thinking about that kind of that outward facing kind of perspective, but I think when I was writing Western Lane, I was kind of coming at it almost two ways. Like sometimes there was just that initial feeling and voice that I kind of mentioned, and it's not a real voice speaking, it's a kind of a feeling of a voice. And then sometimes it was trying to just inhabit Gopi's body. And then when I could do that, I think it was probably naturally outward facing, because she's not going to be looking at herself when you're in her body. It's going to be looking out.
Right. I like that, you know, when you're in her body, you're outward looking at, because sometimes I feel that when my young students write, aspiring writers, sometimes they forget they have a body, or the characters have a body, you know, the characters have bodies, the physicality, and also just the surrounding, which, you know, comes back to the squash court. The court always reflect Gopi's thoughts and feelings as echoes back to her, right? But then I also, you know, one of the very touching moment in the novel is when they really actually left the recreation center. They went on to a trip, the field trip, not the field trip, but it's a fun fair trip, right?
Yeah.
I at that moment, I think, you know, it's a full car of people, right? They all piled onto each other and they drove to a fun fair. It's like a state fair in America. It's one of the most touching moments in the novel. I feel the novel opens up. All of a sudden, I realized, oh, there's the world. And what a strange world it is for these girls. Can you talk about the larger world, for instance, England, right? Or, you know, Edinburgh, or just the larger world, because you're not a heavy-handed writer. You're not saying, oh, look at these people, you know, eating candies and drinking alcohol at the fun fair. You know, you're very subtle. I want to hear you talk about the larger world in these characters' lives.
Yeah, and I guess in a way, maybe the way that I've described that larger world comes back to what we were talking about earlier, is where they have come from. So, they are a sort of a Gujarati Jain family, and in a way, in some ways, quite insular, in that, you know, because the family is so close and they all have each other, they are used to just being together, the five of them in the family, and the community. And then when you go out of they step out of the kind of the boundaries of the family, and I think there's a lot of stepping out of boundaries perhaps in this, what they observe is strange. It's not what they're used to. They don't go to the fun fair every day. And I wanted them to kind of go to these places, and, you know, and the fun fair in particular was partly to give a bit of breathing space to the book, but also just to get them out of the home and out of the squash court. But then what they discover there is another strange place.
That's very strange.
Yeah.
It is a strange world. I just want to hold up the book again to show everyone the book. There's a question in the comment section. So I'm going to ask the question, and I'm going to encourage the readers or the audience to ask questions, and I'll come back to my question. So here's a audience question. As someone who has recently suffered a family loss, I appreciate the beautiful observance of the mundane, because that is what stands out in the immediate aftermath of loss. sounds, weather, spaces, etc. How easy or hard was it to create those nuances and to strike the balance between observing grief and not have the story become depressing?
I don't know how conscious I was of that. I think there were things that I did to try to open it out from everything that they were feeling. But I think I kind of came to those naturally. Almost, I would read the book, over and over and over again, as far as I had written, and could almost feel when I needed something to either lighten it or just change tack slightly. So I don't know if I was doing that consciously or if it was just moving with the flow of the kind of the feeling in the book. But yeah, I think I hope there is lightness and joy, not least in that kind of the way in which the sisters are this collective. And I think there's just so much, but I feel a lot of joy in that, how whatever they're going through, but also in some of the other characters that come into the book.
Right. The boy and the mother working. Because there's a little humor there, because the woman is a white woman and the boy is a white boy, right? Yeah. And the community actually reacted a little bit oddly. They're all of a sudden they realize, well, someone from their community are talking to someone outside the community, and we feel that it's like a whispering network saying so-and-so is talking to so-and-so. So there is humor there. There's also a little bit of it's very subtle. I think the book is subtle. There's a little tension between the races, right? There's different race, but you're not sort of pounding on that. But can I ask you about that humor of that moment when the community are all watching? How is this family doing?
Yeah, and it's sort of represented by one woman who comes in to the house, and she I think at one point, God said everyone was interested in what we were eating. So the mother is gone and everyone wants to know, what are you eating? And so this woman comes into the house and she's kind of looking around at what are they eating. But she also notices that the father is outside in the garden with a white woman called Linda, who is who works at the sports center, and who he has become friendly with. So yeah, I don't know. I probably wasn't being intentionally that humorous there, but it is just one of those situations where there is that kind of, there is the tension. There are people being ignored. There's kind of the language issue in that section as well, and yeah, I don't. I can probably talk a bit about that tension in the communities or between the communities as well. So, I think where the family live is probably not an untypical industrial multiracial town in Britain. Right. At a time when there was both integration and conflict between the communities, and I'm really interested in kind of and value community and belonging, but at the same time, when you're inside a community, you can see that it can exclude as well as include. And I think that in one of the books that I was reading when I was writing the novel was The Member of the Wedding by Carson McCullers, which is set in the Deep South. And it brings that out, out very, very strongly, that sort of, that question of.
Very good. Yeah.
And yeah. So yeah, like you're saying, it's clear that some people in the Gujarati community disapprove of past friendship with a white woman, and they would of Gopi's friendship with Ged, her son.
Yes, yeah, very much so. Yeah.
And Mona knows that she couldn't easily enter a relationship with a Pakistani boy, and then there is this kind of undercurrent of threat and violence on the estate where the family live. So the girls are kind of amazed that nobody runs them out of the fort where they play behind the house. They often come home with like bruises and torn clothes. They avoid the underpass. So, you know, we don't see it, but I think there's that kind of, probably you can feel it.
Yeah, there is that, as you said, there is the undercurrent of danger, right? We know there's something unsettling, and there's something else that is very unsettling. Is at the beginning of the novel, when the mother died, the aunt suggested the father give up one of the girls, and then she said something. I marked it because I actually gasped, even though I know exactly that's how things are carried out. You know, you are a single man raising 3 girls. We are going to help you, right? Send one of the girls living with us, and the aunt said, then she said that her own sister had flown over 2,500 miles from Mombasa to Bombay to live with their aunt when she was younger than me. And we were only talking about a few hours in the car. There is this, I gasped when I said, I know exactly, you know, I guess in the, as you said, in the community or in the traditional culture, it's a bigger family, right? You know, if your parents died in Mombasa, you might as well just come to live in Bombay. And yet, you know, the 3 sisters, there's also a little bit of very Westernness of that core family. And now here's the aunt suggesting, well, why don't you just give up a girl? And for the longest time, I thought, oh my God, please don't give them up. Don't give them up. But I want you to talk a little bit about that, just that tension between traditional culture and traditional value and practice, and how things feel important to the 3 girls. I think it's absolutely important for them to stay together, right, as a family.
Yeah. I mean, they are, it's almost just going back to the fact that they are so intimate and they are like that collective, you know, they are a 3. And, you know, Gopi in particular, we see her perspective because she's narrating, but she is constantly using that kind of that we
right,
in relation to her and her sisters and looking for that connection. But it's also true that the family is close, the extended family is very close, or at least emotionally close. And I think that further up the generations, they would have been even closer. They would have all been living in the same house together.
right.
And I remember listening to a podcast where it was a South Asian writer, and I have blanked as to who it was now, so I apologize. But it was just saying that there was a point at which he and his parents moved away. He lived in a house with like his parents and his aunts and uncles and grandparents, and there's a point at which his family, so his parents and his siblings, were going to move away, and it was only at that point that he realized which was his mother and which was his aunt. And so there was that kind of real closeness between the families. And, you know, these are families where it might be the case that an aunt nurses the child, so you know, they all live together and the aunt nurses the child. So so that's where they come from, but it's much closer and seems to make more sense further up the generation when they're all living together. That's sort of continued down the line as a sort of expectation of something that is possible when they're living, you know, a few hours apart in the car. And the girls have not grown up with that, and I think that's the difference. They've grown up in a Western town.
Right. Right. It's so interesting because immigration or migration, some things are become less possible. For instance, when you have a whole family living together and can nurse, a nephew and everybody. So how conscious are you when you are working on this novel or when you're writing about these girls that it's also an immigrant story?
I'm not sure I am consciously thinking about it in that way. I'm thinking about the family's sort of immediate situation of the mother is gone and what do they do? And just following that kind of feeling and following Gopi's situation and just seeing how she navigates and how the family navigates through it. But I have set it in a world that I know, which is the immigrant situation, and so I think just naturally kind of the concerns of that situation just come into the book.
Yes. And so the situation is they have lost a mother, right? So there's a huge absence at the center of the novel. Now I'm going to I'm curious about the three girls because we only get to know them after they lost their mother. So now I'm going to ask you just to sort of imagine in an alternative world, if the mother lived, how would the three girls grow, into themselves versus motherless, and they in this version of the novel? And there's a reason I asked that question, because I'll just explain to you why I asked that question, because I do think sometimes when you have the alternatives of characters' lives in mind, a story becomes more interesting. So I want to know the alternative you have for the girls if they did not lose the mother.
That is a really interesting question, and I have to say, honestly, I don't have an answer to that. I think that when I don't know, just thinking about the stories where a mother is absent, and it's all over literature. We seem to love the absent mother, and it's kind of right from fairy tales to so many, like, I don't know, Jane Austen Victorian novels where the mother is gone. It kind of creates a break between the generations, and this it allows for the child to become kind of solitary and self-reliant in a particular way. I think in Western Lane that happens. They we follow Gopi the most, and she becomes more self-reliant. But I think that somehow there's also a communication that's opened up between the generations.
Right.
So yeah, I can't answer that question about what would their life have been. I think it's possible that, for example, Gopi might not have become close friends with Ged. And Mona, I think, would not have perhaps not have had this friendship with the Pakistani boy. But yeah, I don't know.
I find it so interesting because the mother also does not speak English well, and they do not speak the mother's language well. And somehow I feel that the death of the mother, sort of highlights something that, any death highlights something, right? So I was, while I was reading, I thought, okay, the mother did not die. Would they move away from the mother? Would they become more fluent in the mother's language or less fluent? Would they cut the mother's language out? It's fascinating to think about the alternatives, right? I think, and I do think, on the other hand, I think tragedy is tragedy because there's no way to change. There's no way to turn the clock back to when the mother, was alive and say, don't die, and let's see how the life plays out for the girls. So I feel the novel has, it's succinctly written, but it provides so much space for the readers to start thinking and, thinking about other things. So I thought it was beautifully done.
Thank you.
Can I, just showing the book cover one more time, and please feel free to put questions in. And I want to ask, it's a very minor character in the novel. I found it quite touching as the father writes letters to a friend in Mombasa. The friend is a childhood friend. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because, there's something about that, the physical activity of writing a letter rather than, calling, making a phone call or writing an email. It's writing a letter, sending a letter about the news of England to Mombasa, through, also these two men, they've known each other forever from childhood. Can you talk about that communication? I feel there's a lot to say about that communication.
I don't know. I mean, I came to it as, when I came to write it, I was coming to it as scenes where, because the father is writing, he is present with the girls, but he's not present with them because he's in the world of the letter and writing it. And I think it would be very different if he was phoning his friend in Mombasa. Mm-hmm. I think that it is almost like an ancient link to Mombasa as well, rather than a direct, immediate link.
Right.
Yeah.
I, at least as a reader, also get a sense, well, that's one thing the girls would not have when they grow up. They would not have that person in their lives from the beginning of their lives. And they can maintain a relation. Almost, again, speaking of taking someone out of time, out of space, when you write a letter, as you said, the father is present, but he's absent. He's taking himself out of the family space, right? Home space. He's putting himself elsewhere. I mean, I always just love letters, and I love, when in the old days people write letters. So I just feel, well, that's one thing that the girls would not have when they grow up. They're going to have different connections, but that to me is sort of one loss. Very, it's a minor loss, but it's quite present for me, for the girls. Not only they cannot talk to the mother or, but they cannot have one person in their life as the father has. It's such a good presence for the father.
Yeah. And the girls are fascinated by that letter, the letters that go, and they want to open it.
Yes.
And at the same time, they don't want to open it because they want to imagine what is in there, and is he talking about us? And of course they know he's not talking about them.
Right. Yeah, I think, the novel is so full of these details that we just need to stop and think. I said, oh my God, what's going on there? There's another novel there with the father and the friends in the letters. Yeah. And let me see if I have other questions. Your writing career, can you give the audience just a sense of like how you came to writing? And I thought you were, at some point you were an accountant. Are you still an accountant?
Not at the moment. I think my old boss might be on this call, so I'm just going to say not at the moment. But okay. So I guess I came to accountancy. Well, both of my brothers are accountants, and one of my sisters was an accountant. So when I came to decide what I was going to do, I kind of looked around and I thought, well, I'll make 4, and I kind of drifted into it. I started writing properly maybe 9 or 10 years ago. And before that, I had written, I think, probably 2 or 3 short stories. But it was that thing where you write a story and then you don't edit it and you just put it away, and it's kind of maybe a day's work in total that I'd spent writing until then. And then I kind of did a few kind of workshops, like evening things and weekends. And I think I started working on a novel first, and it was terrible. And I put it away, and I started writing some short stories. And I think that was really great. I mean, I love short stories. The thing that was really good for kind of me learning to write was it's something you can finish, and not always. Like, some of my stories have taken me like 3 years, but sometimes you can finish it, and there's something really good about finishing something, going through the whole process, but also just the buzz of having something that you've made and that is done and complete. And I think that really encouraged me. I entered lots of stories to competitions and to journals. I got a ton of rejections, and then I think in the same year, in the same month, a story was accepted by an assistant editor at the Cincinnati Review, a very short, very, very short piece, and the Bristol Prize here in the UK.
Oh yeah.
And so then I think the big thing I did was in 2018. I went to the Stinging Flies summer school. So it's a week-long school. And Stinging Flies, a journal based in Dublin. And it was amazing. It was just I think it was just kind of transformative in terms of my writing and my reading. And I asked the teacher of that course if he would work with me on my stories, and he said yes. So a few months later, we started working together, and I think that it was almost like doing an MA in it, an MA, but just emailing each other. He would give me just books to read that he would say, I think you would like this. He was looking at stories, and yeah, so from there I was kind of writing more stories, and eventually the novel.
Who's the teacher? Who's
So
the writer?
sorry. Yes. So it's Tom Morris, who is editor at the Stinging Fly and also a brilliant writer.
Okay. Yeah. So there's a question. I think it's about did this writing experience with your debut make you want to go to another fiction book or nonfiction? Do you have any ideas, or maybe just what are you working on now? What are you thinking about these days?
I think definitely fiction. I mean, at the moment, I have no impulse to write nonfiction, and I was working on something that kind of died last week, and I was despondent, but now I actually feel very free. I feel like anything is possible. So I think going through the process of working on something was probably quite good, because you're kind of narrowing down the possibilities, and I kind of feel a lot happier now to just think of something new and just almost just take in lots of stuff and decide what to do next.
Right. Yes. So I just want to remind the audience, we have a couple more minutes. If you have questions, you can send in, but I want to, ask one more question, because you and I both worked with Mitzi Angel, who's our most beloved editor. How did the editing process go with Mitzi?
It was amazing. So, I think I said that the book started with this kind of the feeling and this voice that I followed, and I think so Mitzi's editorial notes were phrase in a way that was very gentle and elegant and clear. And I felt that in her editorial notes, what she was doing was telling me to get out of the way of that voice. And she was just listening very, very, very carefully, just carefully to the voice of the book. And so that experience was, it was amazing, quite magical.
Wait, she told you to get out of that voice.
Get out of the way of the voice.
Get out of the way of the voice.
I mean, she didn't say that in those terms at all. It's just when I read her notes, that's what I felt was coming through.
And that's very interesting. Then when you heard that, so she said, get out of the way of the voice. What was the immediate next thing you did? Or what changed for you when you heard that?
Well, as I say, she didn't say that, but it's kind of what I took away from the notes, which were all very, I don't know, just to give you an example of the sorts of things, it would be that the things in the book felt as though they were necessary and it's kind of essential to the book. But then things would creep in that just didn't, like details or events that didn't have that feeling to them. So it would be, you know, here are some things where I think we're sort of moving away from that, where the overall kind of urgency in the book.
Excellent. I saw Paula coming back. Our time is almost running up. Yes.
Yes. But thank you. This has been great. I don't want to cut anybody off. If there was another burning question. That's it? Okay, yes. Great. No, this was a lovely discussion and really appreciate it. Love the book, both your books. I'm a fan of both, not only the covers, but the content.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I told them earlier, I don't think the audience knows that I really love the covers, but please avail yourselves to both our authors today, their books. We have them plenty at our Corte Madera store, our San Francisco location. You can come in person, obviously. You can even click, there's a link right below on this YouTube channel, and you can do an order online. Either way, we're happy to help you pick up the phone, but do support continue to support events like this and also these authors so that Chetna will write that next novel. We know you've got it in you, no pressure, but we're looking forward to it. Thank you, audience, for showing up and for the questions. And until the next time, please be well. We want Chetna to be able to get to bed because she's on London.
No, even my background is getting dark now. But
yeah, I didn't notice that.
Yeah,
we represent 3 different time zones, and that's okay.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Paula, for doing this.
Our pleasure, our honor. Until the next book.
Yes.
Thank you.